Richard Calloway dropped a personnel file onto the conference table so hard the coffee cups rattled. "I want him gone," he said. "By Friday." Nobody in the room spoke. He tapped the name on the tab of the folder with one finger, slow, deliberate, like he was nailing something down. Daniel Carter. Logistics operations. Single father. No connections. No leverage. Richard looked around the table. Nobody's going to fight for this guy. Nobody ever has. He was right about one thing. Nobody in that room was going to fight for Daniel Carter. What Richard didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that 3 weeks earlier on a freezing Thursday night at O'Hare, Daniel had picked up a stranger's phone off the floor of a gate terminal and asked for absolutely nothing in return. And that stranger was about to walk through the front door of this building and change everything. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far Daniel's story travels. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe. You're going to want to stay for all 5 parts of this one. The morning everything changed. Daniel Carter burned his daughter's pancakes. Not badly. Not the kind of burning that sets off smoke alarms and scares the dog. Just enough. Just that faint edge of char around the rim, the kind of thing most fathers would scrape off and call it fine. Daniel scraped them into the trash instead. Started over. He cracked 2 more eggs, measured the batter, adjusted the flame, even though he was already running 12 minutes behind. Even though the dishwasher was making that grinding noise again. Even though his right shoulder had been aching since Tuesday from sleeping on the wrong side of a mattress that had been wrong since the day he bought it. He started over because his daughter deserved pancakes that weren't burned. That was the whole philosophy. Right there. In a kitchen that smelled like instant coffee and dish soap, in a house where half the closet was still technically empty, in a life that had been rebuilt from the floor up by a man who never asked for help and never expected any. Mia came downstairs in mismatched socks, one striped one with a cartoon bear on it, dragging her backpack behind her like it was full of rocks instead of second-grade homework. Her hair was a disaster. Daniel had been trying to learn braids from YouTube tutorials for 6 months, and he was getting better, but getting better, and actually good, are not the same thing, and he knew it. "Daddy, you burned them again." "I made new ones." She climbed into her chair, pulled the plate toward her, and inspected the pancakes with the gravity of a federal food inspector. "These are good." "I know. You don't have to look so proud of yourself." "I'm not proud. I'm relieved." She almost smiled. Almost. She was 6 going on 45, this kid with her mother's eyes and her grandmother's stubbornness, and something entirely her own. This quiet, watchful stillness that sometimes made Daniel's chest ache in a way he couldn't fully name. He sat across from her with his coffee and watched her eat. He did this every morning. Not because he had time for it. He rarely had time for anything. But because he had learned in the 2 years since his wife walked out that the moments you think you can skip are almost always the ones that matter most. He had learned a lot of things the hard way. His name was Daniel Carter, 32 years old, 5'11", with the kind of face that people described as nice-looking when they were trying to be kind and forgettable when they weren't paying attention. He worked in logistics operations for a mid-sized shipping company called Ardent Group. Not glamorous, not terrible. The kind of job where you show up, you do the work, and nobody stops to ask how you're doing because everyone assumes you're fine. He had been there for 6 years. He had been passed over for promotion twice. He had never once complained about it out loud. His apartment was in a part of town that real estate listings described as up and coming, which was code for not great yet, but we're hoping. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths. A living room with a second-hand couch and a bookshelf. Mia had started filling with her own books, the good ones, the ones with dragons and kids who solved mysteries, and girls who didn't take nonsense from anyone. He had moved there after the divorce, after the house went, after the savings went, after everything went except Mia, who was the only thing that ever really mattered anyway. His wife, her name was Christine. Though Daniel had trained himself to think of her as simply Mia's mother, because it was cleaner, because it hurt less, had left on a Tuesday. A Tuesday in February, which was a stupid time to leave someone, because February was already miserable enough without adding abandonment to the list. She hadn't been cruel about it. That was almost worse somehow. She'd sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table where they used to eat breakfast together, and she'd said, "I can't do this anymore, Daniel. I'm sorry. I can't." And that was it. That was the whole explanation. As if "I can't" was a complete sentence, as if it answered anything, as if he was supposed to nod and say, "I understand," to something he didn't understand at all. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. Not in front of her. He sat there and listened, and then he said very quietly, "What about Mia? She'll be better off with stability, with one parent who's actually present than two who are what?" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. She left 3 days later, and Mia cried for 2 weeks straight, and Daniel held his daughter every night and told her mommy still loved her, which he believed was true, and told her everything was going to be okay, which he was not sure about at all. He didn't go to his friends and talk about it. He didn't go to therapy. He went to work. He came home. He made dinner. He helped with homework. He learned how to do braids from YouTube videos and burned the first 40 pancakes he ever tried to make, and got up again the next morning and tried again. Because that was what you did. Because the alternative was unthinkable. The trip to Chicago was supposed to be simple. 2 days. A logistics conference, the kind of event Ardent Group sent middle management to because it looked good on paper and cost less than an actual raise. Daniel had been before. He knew the rhythm: sit through presentations, shake hands with people whose business cards he'd lose within a week, eat rubber chicken at a networking dinner, fly home. He had arranged for Mia to stay with his neighbor Mrs. Kowalski, a 70-year-old Polish woman who had raised 4 sons and had opinions about everything and made the best bigos in the Northern Hemisphere. Mia loved her. She called her Mrs. K and had once announced with complete sincerity that Mrs. Kowalski was her second favorite person in the world. "Who's first?" Daniel had asked. Mia had given him a look like the answer was so obvious it was almost embarrassing. He'd kissed her on the forehead that morning, told her to be good, told her he'd be back in 2 days, told her he loved her. "I know," she said, just like that, like a statement of fact. He drove to the airport smiling. The conference itself was exactly what he expected. Presentations about supply chain optimization and last-mile delivery efficiency and the future of logistics in a post-pandemic economy. People in expensive suits talking about disruption. People in slightly less expensive suits nodding. Daniel took notes, did his job, called Mia from his hotel room both nights and listened to her tell him about a fight she'd had with a boy in her class who said dragons weren't real. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to read more books." "That's my girl." He flew out Thursday evening expecting to be home by midnight. The storm had other ideas. It came in fast, the kind of winter system that the weather models kept downgrading until suddenly they weren't. Until suddenly it was a full-on ground stop at O'Hare. Wind and ice and visibility down to almost nothing. Flight cancellations began rippling through the departure boards like dominoes falling. Daniel's flight went red at 7:43 p.m. He stood at the gate counter for 22 minutes, while the airline representative, a young woman with the patient, exhausted expression of someone who had delivered bad news approximately 900 times today, told him the earliest rebooking she could offer was Saturday morning. "Saturday," he repeated. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry. We can put you on the standby list for tomorrow. I have a 6-year-old. She looked at him, not unkindly. "I understand. I'm sorry. There's nothing else I can—" "It's fine." He stepped back from the counter. "Thank you." He wasn't angry at her. He was never angry at people who were just doing their jobs. Mrs. Kowalski explained the situation. Listen to her, tell him not to worry, that Mia was fine, that she was currently eating pierogi and watching something about penguins, and had not asked about him once. "She asked twice," Mrs. Kowalski added. "You don't have to tell me what she actually asked. She asked 3 times. She's fine, Daniel. Come home when you can." He hung up and stood in the middle of the terminal and tried to figure out what to do next. The airport was a specific kind of chaos, not dangerous chaos, not screaming chaos, but the low-grade miserable chaos of hundreds of people suddenly displaced from where they needed to be. All of them working their phones, crowding the customer service counters, hauling luggage to nowhere. He found an empty stretch of wall near gate H14 and sat down on the floor, not the seats which were all taken, and opened his laptop and started looking at hotels. Everything within 5 miles was sold out. He tried 10 miles. Almost everything. He was on the phone with a Hampton Inn that had one room available for the obscene price of $412 a night. He was doing the math on whether his per diem would cover it, knowing it wouldn't, deciding he'd cover it himself when he heard the sound. It wasn't loud. It was actually barely audible over the noise of the terminal. But something about it made him look up. She was sitting about 20 feet away, near the far end of the gate seating area, in a section that had emptied out as the crowd shifted toward the main concourse. She had a designer carry-on, the kind with the interlocking initials that said, "You didn't need to look at price tags," sitting on its side near her feet. A leather tote bag that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, and an overcoat that looked like it had been made specifically for her by someone who charged extra for the privilege. She was also completely falling apart, not dramatically, not making a scene. That was the thing that caught his attention. She was trying so hard not to make a scene that it was somehow more obvious than if she'd just cried openly. She had her phone in her hands, and she was staring at it with the expression of someone who had received news they couldn't process, and her other hand was pressed flat against her sternum, and every few seconds she would exhale slowly through her nose like she was practicing a breathing exercise and failing at it. Her luggage shifted off its wheels and toppled. Her phone slid off her lap and hit the floor. She didn't move to pick any of it up. She just sat there. Daniel watched for exactly 3 seconds, just long enough to make sure someone else was going to do something. No one did. 2 people nearby glanced over and looked away. A man walked past the fallen phone without breaking stride. He got up. He crossed the 20 feet. He picked up her phone, first screen cracked at the corner, but still on, and set it gently on the seat beside her. Then he uprighted her luggage. "There you go," he said simply. She looked up at him. Her eyes were dark. Not dark with makeup or fashion. Just dark. The natural color of deep water. And they were very tired. And there was something behind them that Daniel recognized without being able to immediately name. He'd seen it in mirrors for most of the past 2 years. "Thank you," she said. Very formal, very careful, like a door she was opening only an inch. "No problem." He started to turn back toward his wall. The screen wasn't cracked before. He turned back. "What? My phone?" She held it up. "The screen. It wasn't cracked before it fell." "Oh." He looked at it. "Yeah, I saw it hit the corner of the seat. I'm sorry. Can I?" He reached out his hand. She hesitated, then handed it to him. He examined the crack. Top left corner, the kind that spread like a spider web, but didn't usually affect function. "It's cosmetic. It won't mess with the display. But you should probably get a case." "I had a case." "Where'd it go?" She blinked. "I don't actually know." He handed the phone back. She was looking at him differently now, still guarded, but differently guarded the way someone looks when they're trying to classify something they don't have a category for. "I'm Daniel," he said. A pause. "Emily." She didn't offer her hand. He didn't push it. "Your flight got canceled." "Yes." She looked at the phone in her hands. "My flight got canceled and the person who was supposed to arrange alternate transportation is not answering, and the hotel the airline offered is 40 minutes away, and I don't—" She stopped at herself, started again. "I'm sorry. You don't need to hear this. I'm sitting on the floor next to a wall because I can't find a hotel room. I've got time." Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile exactly. Something more preliminary than a smile. "The airline hotel is the Radisson near 294, she said. "They're also offering vouchers for a shuttle that apparently stopped running an hour ago." "Yeah, I saw that. I'm looking at Hampton Inns." "I've been looking at Hampton Inns for 20 minutes. There's nothing." "There's one, out near Elk Grove Village, $412 a night." She absorbed this. "That's robbery. Supply and demand." "I know what it is. I'm tired and I'm—" She pressed her lips together. "Are you going to take it?" "I'm trying to decide. I can—" She stopped again, set her phone down. looked at her hands for a moment like she was making some kind of calculation. I could split it with you. Daniel looked at her. You want to split a hotel room with a stranger you met 30 seconds ago at an airport during a storm. I don't want to, she said precisely. I'm considering the options available to me. He almost laughed. Didn't. I'm not going to take your money, he said. Why not? Because I'm the one with a lead on the room. And because $400 isn't worth the paperwork of explaining this to he caught himself, to anyone. You don't have to explain anything to anyone. My neighbor is watching my daughter. She has opinions. Emily looked up at him. For the first time since he'd walked over, something in her face shifted into something that wasn't defense or exhaustion. You have a daughter. 6 years old. You're away from her. I was supposed to be home tonight. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is she okay? The question surprised him. Not because it was a strange question, but because of how she asked it simply, without calculation, without using it as a conversation move. Like she actually wanted to know. She's fine. She's eating pierogies and watching penguins and pretending she's not worried about me. She sounds smart. She's terrifying. This time Emily actually did smile. Small, real. Okay, he said. Here's what I'm actually going to do. I have a friend Pete from my college days lives in Rosemont, which is about 20 minutes from here. He owes me about 40 favors. I'm going to call him and see if he's got a spare room. For you. For me. He looked at her steadily. And if he does, and if you want, I'll ask if he has a couch too. No obligation either way. You can say no. Emily stared at him for a long moment. Why would you do that? Because the Radisson shuttle stopped running and it's 12 degrees outside. You don't know me. I know your flight was canceled and your phone screen is cracked and you're having a worse night than you expected. That's enough to know. She studied him the way someone studies a document before signing it. Careful, thorough. How do I know you're not dangerous? You don't. But I have a 6-year-old daughter who needs me to come home in one piece, which is about as strong a motivation for not doing anything stupid as I can think of. Another pause. Longer this time. Call your friend, she said. Pete Dempsey answered on the third ring, sounding like he'd already been through half a bottle of something. Danny Carter. The storm get you. Yeah, I need a favor. Brother, I owe you about. I know how many you owe me. I need a place to sleep tonight, maybe 2 nights. And... He glanced at Emily, who was watching him carefully. Possibly a couch for someone else. A pause. Someone else. A woman. She's stranded too. Another pause. Longer. Danny. It's not like that. It sounds like that. It's not. She's just stuck, like me. What kind of person are we talking about here? The kind who needs a place to sleep and is polite about asking for it. Is she cute? Pete. Can we have the spare room and the couch or not? Yeah, man. Yeah, absolutely. You know where the spare key is. Just text me when you're coming. He hung up and turned to Emily. He's got a spare room. I'll take the couch. She stood up. She was taller than he'd expected, maybe 5'8", 5'9". She picked up her leather tote and looked at him across the width of about 2 feet of airport air. I'll pay for a car, she said. That's non-negotiable. Fine. And I'm not... She paused. I want you to know I don't usually do this. I know. You don't know that. You just met me. I know you hesitated for about 3 full minutes before deciding whether to split a hotel room with a stranger. Someone who does this casually doesn't hesitate. She processed that. Okay, she said. Let's go. The car she ordered was not the kind of car Daniel would have ordered. He noticed that. Noted it. Filed it in the back of his mind where he kept things that didn't quite add up yet. He didn't say anything. The drive to Pete's was 20 minutes, and for most of it, they were quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet, the quiet of 2 people who are both too tired to perform. Outside, the storm had shifted from hard sleet to something softer. Fat flakes coming down sideways in the headlights, the city turning white and still around them. Do you live in Chicago? He asked somewhere around the 10-minute mark. No, I was here for a meeting. What kind of work? Corporate. A pause. Operations. Strategy. It's... Another pause. It's complicated to explain. You don't have to explain it. Most people push. I'm not most people. She turned and looked at him. In the passing light, her face was difficult to read. No, she said slowly. I'm starting to think you're not. He looked out the window. You, she asked. Logistics, shipping company, nothing complicated. Do you like it? The question caught him off guard. What? Do you like your job? He thought about it genuinely, which maybe he hadn't done in a while. Parts of it, the problem solving, figuring out how to move things efficiently. I'm good at the puzzle of it. But I spend most of my time in meetings about the puzzle rather than actually solving it. That's true of most jobs above a certain level. I know. That's why I'm not at that level. She studied him. Is that a complaint? No, it's just a fact. Most people would make it a complaint. Most people want sympathy. I just want to get home to my daughter. Pete's house was a narrow two-story in a neighborhood that was quiet under the snow. He'd left the front light on. The spare key was under a ceramic frog by the door. Daniel had always thought the frog was hideous, had told Pete so a dozen times, and Pete had ignored him a dozen times with complete serenity. Inside the house was warm, clean enough. The kind of comfortable disorder that meant someone actually lived there rather than staged it. Daniel showed Emily to the spare room, which had an actual bed with actual sheets and a bathroom attached. He stood in the doorway while she set her carry-on against the wall. This is very kind, she said. Of your friend. He's a good person. And you. I just made a phone call. She turned and looked at him. You didn't have to make any phone call. You could have kept looking at Hampton Inns. The Hampton Inn was $400. That's not why you did it. He didn't answer. Why did you do it? She asked. Genuinely. Not as a game, not as a test. Just a question that wanted a real answer. He leaned against the doorframe. My dad used to say, and I know this sounds like something that fits on a coffee mug, so bear with me. He used to say that who you are is what you do when nobody's checking. She was quiet. You needed help, he continued. I could help. The math was pretty simple. She looked at him for a long moment. Nobody's done something like this for me in a long time, she said finally. Her voice was careful with it. Like it was fragile, like saying it out loud might break something. That seems like it should bother you more than it does. It bothers me more than I'm showing, he nodded. Bathrooms through that door. There are clean towels. The lock on the bedroom door works fine. I know. I'll be on the couch. Pete should be home in the morning. He started to turn. Daniel. He stopped. Thank you, she said, simply. The most basic two words, but she said them like they cost something. Get some sleep, he said. We'll figure out flights in the morning. I took the couch. It was firmer than it looked, which in this case was a blessing. He lay there in Pete's darkened living room and stared at the ceiling and listened to the snow hitting the windows and thought about Mia eating pierogies and thought about the drive back from the conference and thought about the quarterly review he had to finish by next Friday and thought briefly about Christine in the way he sometimes still did not, with longing exactly, but with the particular grief of a man who had loved something and watched it fail without fully understanding why. He thought about Emily, not romantically, not yet, but with the quiet attention he gave to things that confused him, and she confused him in a way he couldn't quite articulate. There was something behind her eyes that didn't match the rest of her. The coat, the bag, the ordered car. All of it said one thing. The way she'd sat in that airport, trying to hold herself together with visible effort, the way she'd said, "Nobody's done something like this for me in a long time," that said something else. I didn't know what to make of the gap between those two things. He filed it in the back of his mind with everything else that didn't add up yet. And eventually, the snow against the windows became a kind of static, and the static became sleep, and he dreamed about nothing at all. In the morning. Pete made eggs. This was classic Pete. He could be useless for approximately 20 things, and excellent at about 3. And one of the 3 was making breakfast with a cheerfulness that bordered on aggressive. He'd come home sometime after midnight, crept past the couch where Daniel was sleeping, and by 7 a.m. was in the kitchen making enough eggs and toast for an entire squad. Daniel woke to the smell and sat up and found Pete leaning against the counter with a spatula grinning. "She's still asleep." "Good morning to you too." "She's pretty Danny." "Make the eggs, Pete." "I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying. Make the eggs." Emily emerged from the spare room at 7:30, already fully dressed, which Daniel suspected meant she was the kind of person who never really let her guard down, even in borrowed rooms, even after difficult nights. She was wearing the same clothes as the night before, which made sense, but she'd somehow managed to make them look intentional rather than slept in. She shook Pete's hand with a firmness that clearly surprised him. "Thank you for having me. You have a beautiful home." Pete blinked. Yeah, thank you. Do you want eggs?" "I'd love eggs." The 3 of them sat at Pete's kitchen table and ate breakfast, and it was normal. Oddly, entirely normal. Pete asked how the conference had gone. Daniel said the usual. Emily listened with what turned out to be sharp, specific follow-up questions about supply chain logistics that made Pete raise his eyebrows at Daniel across the table. After breakfast, while Pete did the dishes, Daniel and Emily sat at the table with their phones and sorted out flights. There was a 2:15 p.m. that had seats. His company's travel portal took 12 minutes to rebook, a process that would have been infuriating under different circumstances, but was simply the texture of the morning. "Got one," he said. "Me too." She set her phone down. 2:30. "Good timing." "Daniel." She was looking at her phone still, not at him. "I want to give you something. For last night." No. "You didn't even let me finish." "I don't need to hear the rest. No." She looked up. "That's not how the world works." "I know how the world works. I'm telling you how I work." "I'm trying to say thank you." "You already said thank you. Last night. That was enough." She studied him across the table. "You're the most stubborn person I've ever met." "My daughter says I'm only the second most stubborn." "Who's first?" "Her." The corner of her mouth moved. "She sounds like someone I'd like." "She'd like you too. She's got good instincts." Emily looked at him for a moment longer than the conversation required. Then she looked back at her phone. The drive to the airport was quiet again, but differently quiet than the night before. The storm had passed completely. Everything was white and crystalline and painfully bright, and the roads were already being cleared, and the city was waking up under 3 inches of new snow like nothing had happened. At the departures drop-off, they stood on the sidewalk with their respective luggage and the awkward, specific silence of 2 people who had spent an unexpected night in the same house and didn't know what to call that. "Safe flight," he said. "You too." "Take care of yourself, Emily." She started to say something. Stopped. Then, "You're a good person, Daniel Carter. I mean that." "You barely know me." "I know enough." She adjusted the strap of her tote. "People show you who they are pretty fast when the circumstances are right. Last night was the right circumstances." She turned and walked toward the terminal. He stood there for a moment, watching her go, and then he turned too and went to check in for his own flight and told himself that was the end of that. A strange night, a canceled flight, a kind thing done without expectation. He was wrong. He just didn't know it yet. I was back at work by Monday. The office was the office, the fluorescent hum of it, the coffee that was always slightly too burnt, the particular acoustic quality of open-plan workspace that made every phone call sound like it was happening to everyone. His desk was a clean rectangle of organized folders and a framed photo of Mia at her kindergarten graduation. She was wearing a tiny cap that was 3 sizes too big and looking directly at the camera with an expression that said, "This is ridiculous, and I'm tolerating it for your sake." He got his coffee. He sat down. He opened his email. Richard Calloway was already in the kitchen when Daniel walked through to the break room, which was exactly the wrong way to start a Monday. Richard Calloway was 44 years old, and had been a senior manager at Ardent Group for 11 years, and he had somewhere along the way decided that his 11 years of seniority constituted some kind of personal ownership over the organizational hierarchy, specifically over the people below him in it. He was not cruel in any dramatic way. He was cruel in the slower, more sustainable way. The comment in meetings that landed just ambiguously enough to not be actionable, the way he looked at Daniel sometimes with a faint smile that said, "I know exactly where you stand." Carter, back from the Windy City. He poured his coffee without looking up. Heard the conference was a nothing burger. It was useful. Get anything you could actually use. Some contacts, a few process ideas. Yes. Richard finally looked at him. Conference contacts. Nice. That smile. That's one way to move up. Daniel poured his own coffee and left without responding. There was no point. There had never been any point. He understood in a clean and entirely non-dramatic way that Richard Calloway did not like him. Not personally. Not specifically. Just in the general way that certain people dislike those who don't perform inferiority convincingly enough. Daniel was not deferential. He was polite, but there was a difference. And Richard knew the difference, and it bothered him. He sat back down at his desk and thought about Mia, who was at school right now, and had informed him at breakfast that she intended to start a petition to change the lunch menu because the pizza was objectively wrong. He smiled at his screen and opened the quarterly report. Monday became Tuesday, became Wednesday. He'd almost stopped thinking about Emily entirely. Almost. How was in the middle of a budget reconciliation on Thursday morning when he heard the shift in the office. It wasn't a sound exactly. It was more like a change in atmospheric pressure, the way a room changes when something important walks into it. People straightened. Conversations dropped. The particular quality of distracted industry that characterized any normal workday was replaced by a kind of collective alertness. Daniel looked up from his screen, and everything stopped. She walked through the main entrance of the Ardent Group floor like she had been there 100 times, which was confusing because Daniel had never seen her before. Or had he? She was with 3 people, a man in an expensive suit who was clearly leading the way, 2 others carrying laptops who were clearly taking notes. She was dressed differently from the airport, different from Pete's kitchen. A charcoal jacket, black slacks, her dark hair back and clean. She moved through the office the way water moves through, not fighting any obstacle, just following the inevitable path. He recognized her 12 seconds before he recognized what he was seeing. Emily. And then, because context does something to recognition, because you see people differently when you see them in a different frame. He saw what he hadn't seen the night at the airport. The posture. The economy of movement. The way the man in the expensive suit was not leading her so much as orbiting her. His colleague Marcus appeared at Daniel's shoulder. "That's Emily Whitmore," Marcus said with the quiet reverence of someone announcing a weather system. Daniel looked at him. "Whitmore," Marcus repeated. "As in Gerald Whitmore's daughter. As in the daughter of the man whose name is on the building technically. As in the woman who's going to be doing the operations review that's been in the pipeline for 6 months and may or may not decide the future of this entire division." Daniel looked back across the office. Emily was shaking hands with the division director. She said something, and the director laughed, and something about the ease of it. The way the room arranged itself around her, without effort, confirmed everything Marcus had just said. "You okay?" Marcus said. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine." He sat very still at his desk for a moment. Then he thought, she knew. She knew who she was the whole time. She was in that airport alone, and she knew who she was, and she said, "Only Emily," and she let me help her. He thought, why would you do that? He thought, who had been so unkind to her for so long that a stranger picking up her phone and finding her a couch qualified as something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. He did not have answers to any of these questions. He turned back to his budget reconciliation, and he did not yet let himself think about what it meant that she had said on a sidewalk outside a Chicago airport. "You're a good person, Daniel Carter." Like she meant to remember it. like she already knew she'd need to say it again someday. The rest of Thursday passed, the way a held breath passes slowly with increasing pressure. Daniel kept his head down. He did what he always did, worked the numbers, answered his emails, attended the 3 p.m. sync on the Eastern Corridor, routing delays, and said nothing about the woman currently 2 floors above him in a glass-walled conference room with the division director and 3 people from what he'd now learned was corporate strategy. Marcus stopped by his desk at 4:30. "You hear what the review is actually about?" "I heard operations restructuring. That's the polite version." Marcus lowered his voice. "Word is, Whitmore, the daughter Emily, she's been given authority to evaluate 3 divisions for consolidation. Ours is one of them. They're looking at redundancies, looking at what can be cut." Daniel looked up from his screen. "Cut. As in positions, as in people." Marcus shrugged in the way people shrug when they want to seem calm and aren't. "Nobody's confirmed anything. But Calloway's been in Hendrix's office 3 times today, which is never a good sign." Daniel looked back at his monitor. On it, the budget reconciliation he'd been working on all week, the one that showed, if you knew how to read it, that his department was running 16% more efficiently than the comparable division in the Southeast region with fewer resources and a smaller headcount. "Thanks for telling me," he said. "You worried. I'm always working." Marcus nodded and left, and Daniel sat for another moment, just looking at the numbers on his screen, and then he printed the reconciliation report, all 42 pages of it, and put it in a folder and went back to work. He didn't go to the coffee machine. He didn't walk past the conference room. He did not look for her. At 5:58, he was the last one on the floor besides the cleaning crew. This was not unusual. He often stayed late, partly because the work required it, partly because the apartment felt different at 6 p.m. than it did at 7, and the difference was made up of a specific quality of quiet that he hadn't fully adjusted to in 2 years. The quiet that meant Mia was at after-school care and not yet home, and the apartment was exactly the size it was, which was smaller than it should have been for everything it had to hold. Howe was shutting down his computer when he heard the elevator open behind him. He assumed it was the cleaning crew coming back for the recycling. It was Emily. She was still in the charcoal jacket, still pulled together in that complete and deliberate way, but she'd been in a building full of people performing competence at each other for 12 hours, and the edges showed it slightly. Her expression when she came through the door and found the floor empty was something close to relief, and then she saw Daniel at his desk, and it became something more complicated. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she walked toward him. "I was hoping you'd still be here," she said. "I usually am." She stopped at the edge of his desk, looked at the printed report sitting in its folder, looked at his face. "You knew this morning," she said, "when you saw me." "About 30 seconds after I saw you, yeah. And you didn't say anything." "What would I have said?" She considered this. "Most people would have said something. Made sure I knew they recognized me. Made sure I registered that we had a connection. We had a canceled flight and a couch. That's not leverage. People have used less. I'm not people." She pulled out the chair at the empty desk beside his Marcus's desk and sat down without asking. It was not a rude gesture. It was the gesture of someone who had been performing composure in public for 12 hours and needed for approximately 90 seconds to not do that. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "You don't owe me anything." "I didn't tell you who I was. You told me your name. Emily, that's your name." "You know what I mean." He leaned back in his chair and looked at her directly. "Okay, why didn't you tell me?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because I wanted to see what you would do." With a stranger who was having a bad night at an airport. With a person who had no reason to help me, except that I needed it. She folded her hands on Marcus's desk. "Do you know how rarely that happens? When you are who I am, when people know who I am, the help always comes with a cost. Always. Someone wants something. A favor, a connection, a name drop, a recommendation. Nobody just picks up your phone and calls a friend. I called Pete. You called Pete." A pause. "I know. That's exactly what I mean." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "So what was it, a test?" No. She said it firmly. No, it wasn't a test. I was exhausted and my phone was cracked and I was trying not to have a breakdown in an airport, and you just appeared and were normal. Genuinely, completely normal. And I didn't want to ruin it by watching your face change when you heard my last name. He thought about this. Does it? He asked. Change. People's faces. Every time. He nodded slowly. Didn't say anything for a moment. For what it's worth, he finally said, knowing who you are doesn't change anything for me. I still think you should have gotten a phone case before now. She let out a breath. It was not quite a laugh, but it was adjacent to one. I ordered one last night, from Pete's guest room. Good. She stood up, smoothed the front of her jacket. The transition back to composure was visible, and because it was visible, it was more human than if it had been seamless. I'm going to be here for the next 3 weeks, she said. Doing the review. I want you to know that what happened in Chicago won't affect anything. I was going to say the same thing. Then we're saying the same thing. She picked up her bag, walked 2 steps toward the elevator, stopped. You printed the reconciliation report. He glanced at the folder on his desk. Quarterly due diligence. You printed 42 pages of quarterly due diligence at 5:58 on a Thursday evening. I like to be thorough. She looked at him steadily. Don't be modest, Daniel. It doesn't suit someone who works the way you work. She walked to the elevator. The doors closed. He sat at his desk for a full minute after she left, not moving, and then he picked up his bag and the 42-page report and went to pick up his daughter. Mia was the last kid at after-school care, which happened sometimes, and which she had never once complained about, which was its own particular kind of heartbreak. She was sitting at a table drawing something with enormous concentration when he came in, and she looked up and went back to drawing for exactly 3 more seconds to finish whatever she was working on, because she always finished what she started even at 6 years old before she got up and came over. She didn't run to him. She walked, deliberate. Like someone who had decided that running was for people who weren't sure the other person was actually going to show up, and she was sure because he always did. She walked up to him and put her arms around his waist. He put his hand on the back of her head. Traffic, she said into his jacket. Something came up at work. Something bad. I don't know yet. She pulled back and looked at him with those dark eyes that saw too much. Your face is doing the thing. What thing? The thing where you're thinking hard and trying not to show it. I'm not. Dad. He looked at her. It's okay, she said. We can talk about it in the car if you want. He took her hand, picked up her backpack with his other arm. What did you draw? He asked. A dragon explaining photosynthesis. To whom? To some kids who thought dragons were impossible. I figured if they understood biology, they'd see that the fire breathing was actually the most realistic part. He looked down at her. Mia. Yeah. You're going to be just fine. She considered this with the gravity she brought to all assessments. I know, she said. So are you. The next morning, Richard Calloway arrived before everyone else. This was also not unusual. Richard was a man who believed that physical presence equated to authority, that the person at their desk earliest was winning some competition. The rest of the office didn't know they were playing. He refilled the coffee. He reviewed his calendar, and he spent 40 minutes preparing for the 11 o'clock meeting with Emily Whitmore, in which the operations team leads would present their departmental summaries. He was confident. He had reason to be confident, or at least he believed he did, which was effectively the same thing. His department's numbers were solid. His presentation was polished. He had managed upward successfully for 11 years, and managing upward was, in Richard's view, the actual skill, not the work itself. Never the work itself, but the presentation of the work, the positioning, the relationship. And he had a relationship to leverage, or thought he did. He had met Gerald Whitmore, Emily's father, at an industry dinner 18 months ago. Shaken his hand, exchanged cards. It was a brief and largely transactional interaction, but Richard had been dining out on it ever since, referring to the CEO as Gerald, in conversations where it served him, implying a familiarity that existed primarily in his own narration of events. He pulled up his presentation on his laptop and decided it was excellent. He did not notice Daniel Carter come in at 7:45, sit down, and spend the next 3 hours adding a 12-page operational efficiency analysis to the folder that was already sitting on his desk. I was not paying attention to Daniel Carter. He had never paid much attention to Daniel Carter. This was the first of several mistakes. The 11 o'clock meeting was held in the large conference room on the 3rd floor, the one with the long glass table and the view of the street, the one reserved for presentations to people whose time was understood to be more valuable than the room's usual occupants. 7 team leads were present. Emily sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 members of her strategy team. The division director, Hendricks, sat to her right with the stiff posture of a man who understood that his presence here was largely ceremonial. Richard went forth after 3 other leads, and his presentation was objectively well constructed. Clean slides, clear metrics. He hit his talking points about client retention and regional growth and the projected impact of the new software integration. He made eye contact with Emily at the right intervals. He spoke with authority. He finished and asked if there were any questions. Emily looked at her notes. Your department's client retention rate went up 7% last quarter. That's right. What drove that? Richard smiled. Strong relationship management. My team is exceptionally client-focused. The 3 clients who renewed, they're all in the same corridor as the routing optimization that Carter's team implemented in Q2. Did your retention work precede or follow that implementation? A pause. Shorter than it should have been to go unnoticed, longer than Richard would have liked. The routing work that was a support function. My team's relationships were the primary driver of. I'm not assigning credit, Emily said evenly. I'm establishing causality. It matters for the restructuring analysis. Richard recalibrated. Of course, we can pull the timeline on that. Thank you. That would be helpful. She made a note. One more question. Your headcount is 12 people managing a regional portfolio of what size? He told her. She nodded and wrote something down, and Richard sat back down and could not fully identify why he felt for the first time all morning slightly unsteady. Daniel presented last. He had not prepared slides. He had 42 pages of printed analysis and a yellow legal pad, and the 48-page efficiency report he'd added that morning. He walked to the front of the room and set the folders on the table. I don't have a deck, he said. I figured the numbers were cleaner without one. Emily looked at him. My department manages 11 corridors with a team of 7. Last quarter we ran at 16% above the regional efficiency benchmark with a 3% cost reduction versus the prior year. I've been tracking a bottleneck in the Midwest transfer protocol that I think is costing the company roughly $80,000 annually in delay penalties. I've built a rerouting model that addresses it, which is in the packet. He slid copies across this table. I've also included a comparative analysis of our headcount to output ratio versus the Southeast Division, which I know is the other department being considered for the review. I thought it would be useful to have them side by side rather than on separate days. The room was quiet. Emily picked up the packet, turned to the comparative analysis, read for a moment. You built this morning, she said. It was not a question. I had most of the data already. The framing took a couple hours. Why didn't you prepare a presentation? Because a presentation would have been about telling you what I wanted you to think. The data tells you what's actually true. Those aren't always the same thing. More quiet. Hendricks looked at his notes. Richard looked at the table. 3 of the other leads looked at Emily, who was still reading. She looked up. Walk me through the rerouting model, she said, and he did. Richard caught up with Daniel in the hallway after the meeting. Carter. Daniel stopped, turned. Richard had the particular expression of a man recalibrating. He'd spent the last 40 minutes watching something he didn't anticipate, and he was now constructing a response to it, and the construction process was visible in the set of his jaw. Nice move in there. It wasn't a move. Printing a 40-page packet at 7 in the morning. having the comparative analysis ready like you knew what the review was focused on. He tilted his head. How'd you know what the review was focused on? I read the terms of reference when they circulated 2 weeks ago. It outlined the evaluation criteria. Right. The tone said he didn't believe this, or rather that he believed it, and didn't want to. And you just happened to have a relationship with the person running the review. Daniel looked at him steadily. I helped someone at an airport, that's all. That's a very convenient story. It's not a story, it's what happened. Carter. Richard's voice dropped. Not threatening exactly, just private. I've been here 11 years. Hendricks trusts my judgment. I know how these reviews go. They come in, they ask questions. They go back to corporate and write a report, and everything stays the same. What they don't do is reorganize around someone who what? A pause. Someone who isn't positioned for it, Richard finished. Positioned. Daniel repeated the word the way you repeat a word to show you understand exactly what it means and exactly what work it's being asked to do. I'm going to go finish my afternoon. He started to walk. People are going to figure out you know her, Richard said behind him. They're already talking. Daniel stopped, did not turn around. Let them talk, he said, and walked away. Tete. The talking started by Wednesday. It had the specific texture of office rumor, low-grade unverifiable spreading through the building, the way cold air spreads, finding every gap. Daniel had planned the airport encounter. Daniel had known who she was the whole time. Daniel had leveraged the connection to position his department for favorable treatment during the review. He heard versions of it from Marcus, who was reporting it with the uncomfortable loyalty of a friend who wanted him to know and didn't want to be the one telling him. He heard a version of it when he walked past a cluster of people in the break room who went quieter in the specific way that meant they'd been talking about someone who just appeared. He did not address it. This was a strategic decision that looked to the people watching, like either confidence or obliviousness, and he was comfortable with both interpretations. Defending himself would mean entering the conversation, and entering the conversation would mean giving it oxygen. He had learned from years of watching how offices actually worked, as opposed to how they claimed to work, that rumors without fuel burned out. What he did not anticipate was Richard providing the fuel. It came in the form of an email. Not from Richard directly. Richard was too careful for that, but from Richard to Hendricks, carbon copied, to 3 senior leads with the subject line, flagging potential conflict of interest, Q3 operations review. In the email, Richard outlined with the careful precision of a man who had prepared for this. The sequence of events as he'd constructed them. Daniel Carter had a prior personal relationship with Emily Whitmore. This relationship had not been disclosed. The department analysis Daniel had submitted to the review committee prepared and submitted after Emily arrived on site raised questions about whether proprietary information about the review's focus had been shared in advance. The email did not make explicit accusations. It didn't have to. It simply raised questions, and questions were enough. Daniel found out about it at 2 in the afternoon when Hendricks called him into his office and slid a printed copy across the desk. He read it. He read it a second time. He set it back on Hendricks's desk. Is there anything you want to address? Hendricks said carefully. I helped a woman at an airport 2 weeks ago. She turned out to be who she is. I didn't know that when I helped her, and I didn't use the connection at any point in any way that affected my work or the review process. The comparative analysis. The review terms of reference specified that the evaluation would focus on headcount efficiency and cost per output benchmarks. That's public information that went to every team lead. I used it to build a relevant analysis. That's my job. Hendricks looked at the email, looked at Daniel. Richard is a senior manager with a lot of institutional knowledge of how we operate, Hendricks said, which was not quite a statement and not quite a warning, and managed to be both. I know. He's raising concerns. He's raising a narrative. Daniel kept his voice level. There's a difference between a concern and a story someone has decided to tell. I can't control which one people believe. What would you have me do, Daniel? I'd have you look at the work. He stood up. Everything I submitted, Everything I've done for 6 years here. It's all in the record. If the record doesn't speak for itself, then nothing I say in this office is going to change that. He picked up his coffee cup from the desk. Can I go back to work? Hendricks looked at him for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. You can. He did not tell Mia about the email that night. She was 7. She would turn 7 in 3 weeks, and she had opinions about her birthday cake that had been evolving for 2 months, and currently stood at chocolate, but not too chocolate, and with strawberries on the side. But the strawberries shouldn't touch the cake itself, because the moisture ratio changes the cake texture. And she did not need to be carrying his problems on top of her homework, and her dragon advocacy initiatives, and the ongoing petition about the school lunch menu. Hi Mata Spaghetti. They talked about school. She had a disagreement with her teacher about whether a dragon could technically be classified as a reptile, and she had researched the counter-argument and presented it in class, and her teacher had told her that dragons were not real, and Mia had looked at her teacher with what she described as patient disappointment. You told me once, Mia said, twirling spaghetti, that imagination is just the part of your brain that sees possibilities before they exist. I did say that. So maybe dragons aren't real yet. That doesn't mean the question of how to classify them isn't a valid scientific discussion. He looked at his daughter. You're 7 years old. I'm 6, for 3 more weeks. You're already 6 going on 45. Someone told you that before. You tell me that. You tell yourself that. She considered this. That's probably true. She ate a piece of spaghetti. Dad. Yeah. Is everything okay at work? He looked at her. Someone's being unfair to me, he said. He had decided some time ago that Mia was too perceptive for the kind of dishonesty that passed for protection. There's someone who's trying to make a situation look different from how it actually is, and I'm trying to figure out how to handle it. She thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. Mrs. Kowalski says, she began in the tone she used when she was quoting a source she considered credible, that the truth is heavy and lies are light, and that's why lies travel fast. But heavy things, she says, are the ones that stay. He was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Kowalski is a very wise woman. She also says you should stand up for yourself more. She said that. She says it about you specifically. She says you're too good at absorbing what other people do to you. When did she say this to you? Tuesday, during pierogies. Mia looked at him calmly. She's not wrong, Dad. He looked at his daughter, this extraordinary, impossible child sitting across from him with spaghetti sauce on her chin and the patience of someone 4 times her age. I know, he said. I'm working on it. The full company meeting was called for the following Monday. It was scheduled as a routine operational update, the kind of meeting that happened quarterly, that most people attended with their phones under the table and their attention at about 40%. But the presence of the strategy team and the rumor that the review findings would be addressed and the particular way that Richard Calloway walked into that room, back straight, chin slightly elevated with the energy of a man who believed he had already won something, made the air feel different. 40 people. The long conference room on the 3rd floor, which they only used for things that mattered. Emily sat midway down the table, not at the head. She'd ceded that position to Hendricks, which Daniel noticed and thought about. Richard presented first. He'd requested to go first. He'd apparently told Hendricks he had some operational matters to raise that were time-sensitive, and Hendricks, who had been managing Richard's ego for the better part of a decade, with the exhaustion of a man who knows the cost of the alternative, had agreed. What Richard presented was not operational matters. It was a case. Careful, structured, professional in its format, devastating in its intent. He walked through this timeline: the airport, the night in Chicago, Daniel's submission to the review, the comparative analysis. He used words like optics and disclosure obligations and institutional integrity. He included a slide, an actual slide showing the overlap between Emily Whitmore's arrival and the submission date of Daniel's report. The room was completely silent. Daniel sat at his seat and listened and kept his face neutral and thought with a clarity he hadn't expected, this is what it was always building to. The 11 years of Richard Calloway being exactly who Richard Calloway was. The comments in meetings, the particular smile, the way he'd said, "single father," like it was a diagnosis. All of it had been building to this room, this meeting, this man standing at the front with a presentation designed to end a career and calling it a concern. Hendricks looked at Emily. Emily had been listening to Richard's presentation with her hands flat on the table in front of her, her expression neutral, making notes. She looked up when Richard finished. "Thank you, Richard." She set her pen down. "I'd like to address this directly." Richard spread his hands in a gesture that said, "Of course, please." She stood up. "I was at O'Hare Airport on the evening of the 7th, she said clearly. "My flight was canceled in the storm. I was alone. My phone hit the floor and I was tired and I couldn't manage it." Daniel Carter walked over from about 20 feet away and picked it up. "He didn't know my name. He didn't know my connection to this company. I know this with certainty because I told him only my first name." The room was still. "He called a friend. He found me a safe place to stay overnight. He slept on a couch. In the morning over eggs, he told me about his daughter and about his work, and I noticed he spoke about the logistics problem in his corridor, the same way he would have if I'd been a stranger on a train. Because as far as he knew I was." She looked at Richard. The comparative analysis Daniel submitted was prepared using publicly available review criteria that were circulated to all team leads. "I reviewed the timeline. He began the data collection the day before I arrived on site, not after. And the analysis itself is the most rigorous departmental submission this review has received." She paused. "Which is either evidence of improper coordination or evidence of someone who does excellent work and had 2 years of data ready to use. Given that I've now spent 3 weeks reviewing this operation, I know which one it is." She sat down. Nobody moved. Richard opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," Emily said. She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. Richard closed his mouth. "What concerns me," she continued, "is not Daniel Carter's conduct. What concerns me is a 13-year pattern. And yes, I pulled 13 years of performance records because that's the review I was sent here to do, a pattern in which this department's metrics have been consistently underrepresented in leadership reports. In which credit for collaborative work has been systematically attributed upward. And in which at least 4 personnel actions, including 2 performance reviews and 1 blocked promotion, appear to have been influenced by documented personal animus rather than objective evaluation." The room was so quiet that Daniel could hear the ventilation system. Hendricks had gone still. Richard's face had changed. The composed certainty of 40 minutes ago had been replaced by something that looked like a man standing on ground that was shifting under him without warning. "I want to be clear," Emily said. "The purpose of this review was never to find a reason to eliminate positions. It was to identify where this organization is underutilizing its actual resources." She glanced down at her notes. "In some cases significantly underutilizing." She looked at Hendricks. "I'll have the full report to corporate by Thursday, but I wanted to address the concerns raised this morning before they had time to circulate in a form that was unfair to someone who has done nothing wrong." She picked up her pen. "Are there other operational matters to discuss?" The silence lasted another full second. Then, Hendricks cleared his throat and said yes, there were. And the meeting continued, and Richard Calloway did not say another word for the remaining 40 minutes, and Daniel Carter sat in his chair and looked at the table and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not vindicated, not triumphant, just seen, accurately seen, by someone who had looked carefully and told the truth about what they found. He hadn't known how much he'd needed that until it happened. He hadn't known how long he'd been invisible until someone finally looked. The meeting ended at 12:47. Daniel knew the exact time because he looked at his watch when Hendricks said, "Thank you, everyone," in the tone of a man who was relieved that a controlled detonation had gone off without taking the building with it. 12:47. He'd remember that number the way you remember small arbitrary details when something large happens around them, the way trauma and relief both have a tendency to burn the surrounding moment into permanent storage. People filed out. Most of them didn't look at Daniel directly. A few did quick glances, the kind that carried information but didn't want to transmit it visibly. Marcus caught his eye on the way out and gave him a single nod, the compressed version of everything a friend wants to say when the setting makes saying it impossible. Richard left without looking at anyone. Daniel stayed seated until the room was empty. Then he gathered his folders and his legal pad and his 42-page report, which felt now like a different object than it had been 3 hours ago. And he walked back to his desk on the second floor and sat down and stared at his screen for approximately 90 seconds without seeing anything on it. Then he opened his email and went back to work, because that was the only thing he knew how to do with a feeling this size. Put it somewhere and keep moving. He'd been doing it for 2 years. He was good at it. Maybe too good at it if Mia and Mrs. Kowalski were to be believed, and increasingly he thought they were. At 2:15 his desk phone rang. Carter. Daniel. It was Hendricks. Come up to my office when you have a moment. It wasn't a question. I'll be up in 5 minutes. Hendricks's office was on the third-floor corner position with the kind of view that said, "This is what seniority looks like," without having to say anything out loud. He was standing when Daniel came in, which meant something, though Daniel wasn't immediately sure what. "Sit down." Daniel sat. Hendricks sat across from him, not behind his desk, which also meant something. He laced his fingers together on the table between them and looked at Daniel with the expression of a man assembling words carefully. "I owe you an apology," Hendricks said. Daniel waited. "The promotion, 2 years ago, and the one before that." Hendricks looked at his hands. Richard raised objections both times. I told myself his concerns were legitimate operational questions about bandwidth and team stability. I think I knew even then that they weren't, not entirely. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Emily Whitmore is going to put it in a report that goes to Gerald Whitmore and the full board, and I'd rather you hear it from me first." He paused. "And because it's the right thing to do, which I should have done sooner." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. He felt not angry. Something more complicated than angry. The specific exhaustion of a man who has been asked to wait patiently for recognition that should have been a given and is now being told the waiting was unnecessary and is supposed to receive this information gracefully. "What happens to Richard?" he asked. "That's above my pay grade now. Emily's findings go to corporate HR and the board simultaneously. Whatever they decide, I don't have authority to override it." Hendricks paused. "My honest read. He's done. You don't put something like today in a formal review and walk away from it unchanged." "And the department? What about it? The restructuring, the consolidation the review was looking at?" Hendricks leaned back. "Between you and me, the analysis you submitted this morning made a very compelling case for why this department is exactly where it needs to be, with exactly the resources it has, and why the real efficiency question is about process alignment, not headcount reduction." He looked at Daniel steadily. "Emily pulled me aside before the meeting started and told me she'd be recommending we look at expanding your team, not cutting it. She wanted me to be prepared for that recommendation." Daniel was quiet. "You're surprised," Hendricks said. "I'm processing." "You've been doing excellent work for 6 years, Daniel. The numbers have always shown it. I should have made sure the numbers led somewhere." "Yeah," Daniel said, simply. Without venom, without forgiveness, just the acknowledgement that something true had been said. "You should have." Hendricks nodded. He'd earned that. "Go home at a reasonable hour tonight," Hendricks said. "That's an instruction." Daniel almost smiled. Almost. He stood up, picked up his folder, and went back to his desk. Emily found him at 4 o'clock. She didn't call ahead. She didn't send a message through the formal channels. She came down to the second floor the same way she'd come down Thursday evening, directly without ceremony, and she sat down in Marcus's chair again, which was becoming a habit, and she put her laptop bag on the floor and looked at him. "How are you?" "I'm fine." That's the answer you give people when you don't want to talk about it. "I know." He leaned back. "How did you know about the promotions, the blocked ones?" "Performance record, HR file. Cross-referenced with Richard's objection memos, which were in the system." She paused. He was very careful about it, always framed as legitimate operational concerns. But when you pull 5 years of it together, the pattern isn't subtle. You pulled 5 years of records. 13. I told the room 13. He looked at her. You pulled 13 years of records. That's my job. That's what the review was actually for. She met his eyes. I want you to know that what I said in that room had nothing to do with Chicago. I said it because it was accurate and because it needed to be said. If the data had shown something different, I would have said something different. I need you to believe that. I believe it. You believe it easily. Because I watched you read, in Pete's kitchen at the table. You asked me about the routing bottleneck before I'd even mentioned it in the presentation. You'd already found it in the preliminary data. Someone doing this as a favor doesn't do that kind of work. She was quiet for a moment. Most people would have assumed the favor anyway. Most people aren't paying the right kind of attention. She looked at him. Something passed through her expression that she didn't immediately put away. Richard is going to fight it, she said. The findings. He's already got an attorney apparently. He'll claim the review was compromised by a personal conflict of interest. Your conflict of interest. Mine and yours. He'll argue that what happened in Chicago created a bias. She held his gaze. Which means the next few weeks are going to be complicated. Corporate HR will conduct their own review of my findings. There will be questions. About both of us. What kind of questions? The kind that make people uncomfortable. Timeline questions, relationship questions. How we met, what we discussed when. She paused. I want you to be prepared for that. Daniel looked at her. Emily. Yeah. I helped you pick up your phone. I called Pete. I slept on a couch. If someone wants to spend weeks investigating that, let them. My conscience is clear. He looked at her steadily. Is yours? She held his gaze for a moment. Yes, she said. Quietly, but without hesitation. Then we're fine. She picked up her laptop bag, stood, looked at him from a standing position with an expression. He was starting to recognize the one that was not quite guarded and not quite open, the one she wore when she was deciding something. Mia's birthday is coming up, she said. He blinked. How do you know when her birthday is? You mentioned it, at Pete's kitchen table. You said she was 6 and that she'd be 7 in 3 weeks, and I remember things. He studied her. Okay. I'd like to do something. For her birthday. Nothing large. Something appropriate. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She looked at him directly. I want to. There's a difference. He looked at her for a long moment. She wants a book, he said finally. She's been wanting a specific one. It's a dragon encyclopedia, an illustrated one. I keep meaning to order it and forgetting. Emily nodded, made a note on her phone. Done, she said. Emily. It's a book, Daniel. Let me get the kid a book. He almost argued, stopped himself. Okay, he said. She walked toward the elevator, stopped at the edge of the floor. For what it's worth, she said without turning around. What you did in that meeting, staying quiet, not reacting, that took more discipline than anything Richard did. Anyone can make noise. Not everyone can hold still while someone tries to burn them down. She pressed the elevator button. See you tomorrow, she said. The doors opened. She stepped in. And Daniel sat at his desk in the post-4 o'clock quiet of a mostly empty floor and thought about discipline and about holding still and about whether those were virtues or just habits he'd developed, because the alternative had always seemed worse. He wasn't sure he had an answer. He went home and made dinner. Richard's attorney moved fast. By Wednesday of the following week, a formal objection had been filed with corporate HR challenging the validity of the review findings on the grounds of undisclosed personal relationships between the reviewing executive Emily and a department employee Daniel. The filing used language like compromised objectivity and appearance of partiality and reputational risk to the institution, which were all real phrases with real legal weight, even when deployed in service of something that was not real. Daniel found out about it, the way he found out about most things. Marcus' desk, lunchtime. The look on his face that preceded difficult information. They're saying you and Emily have a relationship that predates the review, like a relationship. We spent one night in separate rooms of Pete Dempsey's house because our flights were canceled. I know that. Pete was there. I know Daniel. Pete made eggs. I believe you. Marcus put his hands up. I'm just telling you what the filing says. It's in the language. Extended personal relationship. Prior acquaintance of an intimate nature. He shook his head. Richard's lawyer is good at making things sound like what they're not. Daniel looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at Marcus. What do I need to do? HR is going to want a statement from you, probably tomorrow. They'll want Pete's contact information to corroborate, and they'll probably want... Marcus hesitated. What? They may want to talk to your neighbor, the one who had Mia while you were in Chicago. Daniel went very still. Mrs. Kowalski. Yeah. She can confirm you called from Chicago that night, which establishes the timeline of where you were and when. It's... Marcus stopped. I know this is a lot. She's 70 years old. I know. She's going to have opinions about all of this. I'm sure she will. Daniel looked at his desk. At the framed photo of Mia in the too big cap, looking at the camera with patient endurance. He thought about Richard. About the email with single father, implied like a vulnerability. About the filing with intimate nature, inserted where picked up her phone and called Pete actually belonged. About the specific deliberate craft of making a simple thing into a damning thing of taking a person's character and reshaping it for an audience that didn't know them. He felt something he didn't often let himself feel. Anger. Not the hot reactive kind, the cold clean kind. The kind that doesn't yell, the kind that waits. Set up the HR meeting, he said. Daniel, set it up, and give me Pete's number so I can call him before they do. Pete answered on the second ring, which was faster than usual. I heard, Pete said. How did you hear? Danny, come on. You think I don't follow things when my name is attached to them? A pause. LinkedIn. Someone from your company connected with me yesterday, and I figured something was up. I need you to be willing to talk to HR. Of course. They're going to ask about that night, the timeline, where everyone slept. I'll tell them exactly what happened. You on the couch, the woman in the guest room, me coming home after midnight because I was at Kevin's thing. A beat. She's the Whitmore daughter. Yes. The Whitmore daughter slept in my guest room. Pete. That's a thing that happened in my house, Daniel. That's a historical event. Can you please just talk to HR? Yes, absolutely. You know I will. His voice shifted, the joking quality dropping into something more direct. You okay? Daniel leaned back in his chair, looked out the window. Someone is working very hard to make a good thing look like a bad thing, he said. And they're good at it. And I'm trying to figure out what to do with that. You do what you always do, Pete said. What do I always do? You stay honest and you outwork them. You've been doing it your whole life, brother. It's boring as a strategy, but it's never actually failed you. Daniel was quiet for a moment. My dad used to say something like that. I know. He told me too. You think I picked up character as what you do when nobody's watching on my own. Give your father some credit. A pause. How's Mia? Terrifying. Increasingly philosophical. That tracks. Pete's voice warmed. She's going to be something, Danny. I know. So are you. Go do the HR meeting. Tell them the truth. It's the most boring answer, and it's the right one. The HR meeting was on Thursday morning. 2 people from corporate human resources flew in specifically for it, which was itself a statement about how seriously the objection was being taken, or rather, about how seriously the company was taking the possibility that the objection might be used against them if they didn't follow procedure precisely. Daniel sat across from them in a room he'd never been in before, a small conference space on the 4th floor with neutral carpet and a water pitcher nobody touched. He had a legal pad. He didn't need it. He'd decided on the drive-in that morning that he was going to tell the story exactly once, exactly as it happened, without any attempt to shape it or manage it, and whatever they did with it was their decision to make. He told them about the storm, the canceled flight, the gate area at O'Hare, the phone on the floor. He told them about Pete's house, Pete's couch, Pete's eggs. He gave them Pete's full contact information and Mrs. Kowalski's name and number and told them they were both willing to speak. He told them about Thursday evening at the office when Emily had come down to the floor to tell him she'd be working on the review and to be transparent about their prior encounter. He told them about the analysis when he started building it, which data he used, how the review's public terms of reference had informed its structure. He put the timeline in writing. Signed it. The two HR representatives asked questions. Careful, specific questions. Daniel answered every one of them. At the end, one of them, a woman with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the practiced neutrality of someone who had sat through a great many difficult conversations, looked at him for a long moment. "Is there anything else you want us to know?" she asked. He thought about it. "Yes," he said. "I understand why this process has to happen. I understand the company has to take a formal objection seriously. I don't have a problem with any of that." He looked at her steadily. "What I do have a problem with is the word intimate being applied to a night where I slept on someone's couch because it was 12 degrees outside and a woman I didn't know needed somewhere safe to be. That word was chosen on purpose. And I think the people reviewing this should know it was chosen on purpose." The woman with the reading glasses wrote something down. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," she said. "We'll be in touch." 3 floors up in the large conference room where the review findings were being formally compiled, Emily was having a different but not unrelated conversation. Her father had called that morning. Gerald Whitmore was 63 years old, and he had not become what he was by being easily rattled, but there was something in his voice on the phone that morning that Emily recognized as the contained version of rattled, the version her father deployed when he was concerned and didn't want to show it. "I'm hearing complications," he said. "You're hearing Richard Calloway's attorney doing his job. I'm hearing my daughter's name attached to a conflict of interest filing, which will be resolved when HR completes their review of the facts." "Emily." A pause. "How did you meet this man?" "I told you, airport, storm, canceled flight." "And nothing." "Dad." "I'm asking." "And nothing. He's a single father raising a 6-year-old. He picked up my phone from the floor. He called a friend. Nothing happened except that a decent person was decent, which is apparently unusual enough to warrant a legal filing." Silence on the line. "Do you trust your findings?" Gerald asked. "You know I do." "Is there anything in them that a good attorney could reasonably challenge on substance?" "No." "Then we let the process run." "I know." "Emily." His voice shifted slightly. "Are you—" He stopped, started again. "This man, Carter. You said he didn't know who you were." "He didn't." "And when he found out," she looked out the conference room window at the street below. Thought about Daniel's face on Thursday evening when she'd walked off the elevator onto the empty second floor. The absence of calculation in it. The simple, direct quality of someone who was processing a surprise and not immediately trying to use it. "He treated me exactly the same as before," she said. A long pause. Gerald Whitmore said. "The particular HM of a man who has heard something he didn't expect and is taking it seriously." "That's all you're going to say?" "That's all I need to say right now." Another pause. "Let the process run. And Emily, be careful." "I'm always careful." "I know. Be careful anyway." Mia's birthday fell on a Saturday. Daniel had arranged it the way he arranged everything, methodically, with the specific attention to detail of a man who understood that the logistics of love were as important as the feeling of it. He'd ordered the cake from the bakery 3 blocks away, the one Mia had pointed to 6 weeks ago, and said, "That's where my birthday cake is coming from," with the quiet authority of someone who had already made the decision and was simply informing the relevant parties. Chocolate. Not too chocolate. Strawberries on the side. He'd invited 4 of her classmates and Mrs. Kowalski and Pete, who drove in from Rosemont with a wrapped present and a bottle of something for the adults. And the apartment was full, in a way it didn't often get to be. Voices movement. the particular controlled chaos of children who are excited and trying to be good about it. Mia opened presents with the focused efficiency of someone who was genuinely interested in the contents and not performing gratitude for the audience. She thanked each person by name and with specificity. I really wanted this. The third book in the series has the best dragon. These markers are the exact ones I needed for the taxonomy project, which made the adults exchange looks over her head. The Dragon Encyclopedia arrived in a separate box delivered that morning. There was no card. Daniel knew anyway. He watched Mia open it. Watched her go still when she saw what it was, the illustrated one, the specific one, the one she'd described in enough detail that he'd known exactly what to look for. She ran her hand across the cover. Dad. She looked up at him. This is the one. I know. How did you... I only mentioned it once. I pay attention. She looked at him with those dark eyes, and he saw for just a moment the 6-year-old she still was underneath the 45-year-old she was always moving toward, and he felt the specific piercing quality of a love that has no adequate expression. Thank you, she said, simply, the way Emily had said it on a sidewalk outside an airport, like it cost something. Happy birthday, Mia. She went back to the book, already reading. Pete appeared at Daniel's elbow with 2 glasses and a question in his expression. You going to tell me who actually sent the book? I sent it. Danny. Pete. The packaging is from a specialty bookstore in Manhattan. You use Amazon like everyone else. Daniel looked at his daughter turning pages with one finger tracing the illustrations. She needed the book, he said. Someone made sure she got it. Pete was quiet for a moment. You like her, he said. She found a 13-year pattern of blocked promotions and said it out loud in front of 40 people. Of course I like her. That's not what I mean, and you know it. Daniel looked at Mia, at the cake on the table, at Mrs. Kowalski refereeing a dispute between 2 7-year-olds about the correct way to hold a fork. At Pete standing next to him with the patient expression of a man who had known him long enough to wait for the honest answer. It doesn't matter what I feel, Daniel said. She's who she is, and I'm who I am, and the distance between those two things is what? He didn't finish the sentence. Danny. Pete's voice was quiet. You know what your problem is. You think love is something that happens to people who've earned it, like it's a reward for sufficient suffering. He took a drink. It's not. It's just something that happens. To all kinds of people, including you. Daniel looked at his daughter, who had now started explaining dragon taxonomy to the 7-year-old sitting next to her, who was listening with the glazed politeness of someone who had not signed up for this, but was too polite to leave. The HR process isn't finished, he said. Okay. There are still questions about the review. Okay. It would be completely inappropriate to... I know Daniel. Pete finished his drink. I'm just saying, when all of that is over, don't be an idiot. I appreciate the nuance. I'm a nuanced person. From across the room, Mia looked up from her book. She looked directly at Daniel. Then she looked at Pete. Then she looked back at her father with an expression that was entirely too perceptive for a 7-year-old who had only just 20 minutes ago received the Dragon Encyclopedia she'd been wanting. She didn't say anything. She went back to reading, which somehow felt like a verdict. Monday came back the way Mondays always did, with no particular concern for what had happened in the days before. It indifferent to the birthday cakes and the HR meetings and the conversations on couches at 11 o'clock while children slept. Daniel got in at 7:45. His inbox had 43 emails, which was normal. The 44th was from corporate HR. It had arrived at 6:52 a.m. He opened it. He read it. He read it again. The formal review of Richard Calloway's objection was complete. After interviewing all relevant, including the external witnesses, HR had found no evidence of improper conduct or undisclosed conflict of interest on the part of either Emily Whitmore or Daniel Carter. The objection was dismissed. A separate investigation into the conduct issues identified in the operational review would proceed under standard HR protocol. Daniel set his phone down on his desk. He sat for a moment. Then he picked it up again and called Mrs. Kowalski. She answered immediately, which meant she'd been waiting. "It's done," he said. "I know. They called me Friday." A pause. "I told them everything." "What did you tell them?" "I told them you called from Chicago at 9:15 p.m. on a Thursday and told me you couldn't get a flight and asked if Mia was okay. I told them she asked about you 3 times that night. I told them you are a man who does not scheme and does not plan and does not maneuver. I told them you are simply straightforwardly a good person and that I have been watching you be that for 2 years and that anyone who says otherwise is either lying or not paying attention." He held the phone very still. "Mrs. Kowalski, don't thank me, it's just the truth." A pause. "How's the girl?" "She's reading about dragon taxonomy." Still. "She's going to do a presentation. She mentioned something about a visual aid." God help her teacher. He could hear the warmth in it. "Go to work, Daniel. You've earned a normal day." He put the phone down. He looked at the framed photo of Mia on his desk. The too big graduation cap. The patient direct gaze of a child who had decided the world was going to be okay because her father said so, and she had decided to believe him. He thought I told her everything was going to be okay without knowing if it was. He thought, and it was. He opened his email and went back to work. The 43rd email was a routing analysis from the Midwest corridor that needed his attention. The bottleneck he'd identified in the review, the one that was costing the company $80,000 a year in delay penalties. That problem was still there, still real, still waiting for someone to solve it. He pulled up the rerouting model. He got to work. Because that was who he was. That had always been who he was. And for the first time in a long time, the people around him were beginning to understand it. The rerouting model took 3 weeks to implement, not because it was complicated. Daniel had built the framework in a single morning running on institutional knowledge and 2 years of frustration with a system he'd watched waste money and time with the patient. Agony of someone who can see the solution and doesn't have the authority to apply it. The complication was everything around the solution. The sign-offs, the cross-departmental coordination, the careful navigation of a bureaucracy that had calcified around its inefficiencies. The way coral grows around wreckage, slowly, completely, until the wreckage becomes structural. He did it anyway. He sent the proposal up through Hendricks, who approved it in 48 hours, which was the fastest Hendricks had approved anything in Daniel's memory. He coordinated with the Midwest Corridor team, with the Transfer Hub managers, with the software team that needed to update 3 different tracking interfaces. He ran the numbers at every stage and adjusted when the numbers told him to adjust. On a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the HR finding came back clean, the new routing protocol went live. By Friday, the delay penalty rate had dropped 31%. Marcus came by his desk that afternoon and dropped a printed report on his keyboard. 31%, Marcus said. In 2 days. The model projected 28, so we're ahead. Daniel, 31%. I know. Do you understand what that number means in dollar terms? Yes, I built the model. Marcus stared at him. You're going to sit there and be calm about this. I'm going to sit here and document it properly so it goes into the quarterly report with full attribution to the team that implemented it. He looked up. All of them. Not just me. Marcus shook his head slowly. You know what your problem is. Pete tells me regularly. You don't know how to take credit for things. I know how to make sure the right people get credit for things. There's a difference. Marcus picked up his report and walked back to his desk, muttering something that Daniel couldn't fully hear, but suspected was complimentary. That evening, Hendricks sent an email to the full division. It was brief. 3 paragraphs. It named Daniel's routing optimization by name, named the team that had implemented it, and included the 2-day efficiency numbers. The last line read, "This is what it looks like when we let the right people solve the right problems." Daniel read it twice at his desk after everyone had gone home. Then he forwarded it to Pete with no comment. Pete responded in 30 seconds, "I told you." He smiled at his screen and shut down his computer and went to pick up his daughter. Emily called him that night. Not an office call, his personal cell, which she'd gotten from the airport exchange that first night when they'd traded numbers in case the car she'd ordered got the address wrong. He was in the kitchen doing dishes when his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, set down the dish he was holding, picked up. "I saw the email," she said. "Hendrix's email. It went to the full division. You're on the distribution. 31% in 2 days. The model projected 28. Daniel." A pause, and in the pause, something that was almost exasperation. "Can you just for 30 seconds acknowledge that you did something remarkable?" He leaned against the counter, thought about it genuinely. "My dad taught me to fix things," he said. "He was a mechanic, not cars, industrial equipment, conveyor systems, packaging lines. He used to say that a machine doesn't care who fixes it. It just cares whether it runs." He paused. "I think about that sometimes when people make a big deal about the solution instead of the problem. The problem was costing the company $80,000 a year. Now it's not. That's the whole story." Emily was quiet for a moment. "Your dad sounds like he was a good man." "He was the best man I've ever known." He said it simply, without sentimentality, the way you state something that has been true so long it has become structural. "He died 4 years ago. Heart attack. Quick. He was at work." "I'm sorry." "He would have liked the routing problem. He would have sat down with the data and found 3 more things I missed." "Maybe. But he's not here. You are." He didn't answer immediately, looked at the water still running in the sink, and reached over and turned it off. "How much longer are you here?" he asked. "In Chicago. The formal review closes Friday. I'll be back in New York by the weekend." A pause. "The restructuring recommendations go to the board next month. Hendrix will get the full report by end of next week." "What's in it?" "I can't tell you the specifics before it goes to leadership." Another pause. "But I can tell you that the department that submitted a 42-page handwritten analysis on a Thursday morning is not the department that's getting cut." He was quiet. "Daniel." "Yeah." "What you built, the routing model, the comparative analysis, all of it, that work is going in the report as a case study, with your name on it, all the way to the board." He looked at the dish rack, at Mia's plastic cup with the dragon on it sitting next to his regular glass in a line of 2. "You didn't have to do that. It's accurate. Accurate things go in reports." "Emily, don't argue with me about credit again. I will hang up." He almost laughed. "Okay. Good. A beat. I'm glad the process is over. The HR thing." "Me too. I'm sorry it happened. That Richard—" "Don't apologize for Richard. You didn't do anything Richard did." "I know. I'm still sorry it happened to you." "It's done now." "Is it though?" Her voice shifted slightly, carefully. "Has it? Are people at the office treating you differently after the meeting?" He considered this honestly. "Some of them. The ones who were always decent are the same. A few people who were neutral before seem more present. And there are a couple who are uncomfortable around me now, which I think means they know they should have said something sooner and didn't." "And does that bother you? The discomfort? The fact that it took a public moment for people to see what was always there?" He was quiet for a moment. In the other room, he could hear Mia's sound machine, the one she slept with, the one that played rain sounds, which she'd chosen herself at age 5 after determining that rain was the best sleeping weather. "Honestly," he said. "Yes, a little. But I've had 2 years of practice at putting things where they belong and moving on. So I'll put it there, and move on." "And where is there? The place where things go that I can't change and don't want to carry." She was quiet again. The kind of quiet that felt like she was actually sitting with what he'd said, instead of waiting for it to end. "You know," she said finally, "most people I talk to, most people at the level I usually talk to, they spend an enormous amount of energy on what other people think of them. Managing perception, protecting narrative." A pause. "You just don't do that." "I don't have the bandwidth for it. I have a 7-year-old and a routing problem." "You solved the routing problem. There'll be another one." This time she did laugh. Short, real, unguarded in the way she rarely was. "There will absolutely be another one, she said. He smiled at the dish rack. Get some sleep, he said. You've had a long 3 weeks. So have you. I have a 7-year-old. Long weeks are baseline. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Emily. He hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment, the phone still warm in his hand, and he thought about what Pete had said at the birthday party. Don't be an idiot. And he thought about what he'd said back about distance and appropriateness and timing. He still believed all of those things. He also thought she called to tell me about the routing numbers. She could have sent an email. She has my email. Everyone has my email. He put the phone down and finished the dishes and went to check on Mia. She was asleep with the Dragon Encyclopedia open across her chest. He lifted it carefully, marked the page, set it on her nightstand. She didn't wake up. She never woke up when he came in at night. She had decided at some point early in her life that his presence was not alarming, and she slept through it with complete confidence. He stood there for a moment in the dark. I thought I told her everything was going to be okay. He thought I'm starting to believe it. Richard Calloway cleared out his office on a Tuesday. Daniel didn't see it happen. He was in a cross-departmental meeting when the facilities team brought the boxes, when the badge access was deactivated, when 11 years of a man's accumulated professional presence was reduced to the things that fit in a cardboard box and carried to a car in the parking garage. He heard about it from Marcus at 2 in the afternoon. It's done, Marcus said. Official separation, effective immediately. Daniel nodded. How do you feel about it? Marcus asked. It was a real question, and Marcus asked it carefully, the way a friend asks when they're not sure which answer they're prepared for. Daniel thought about Richard. About the email with single father in it, like a category of lesser. About the presentation in the conference room with the slide and the careful language and the word intimate, chosen with surgical precision to do the most damage. About 11 years of blocked promotions dressed up as legitimate operational concern. He didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated in the way the movies suggested you should feel, some cathartic release, some settling of accounts. He felt something quieter. Something that was closer to tired than satisfied. I feel like it should have happened differently, he said. Like the system should have caught it sooner, without someone having to fly a stranger home from an airport and have it accidentally turn into a corporate review. He paused. Richard didn't become who he was overnight. He was that person for years, and the system let him be. Marcus was quiet. But yeah, Daniel said. I'm glad it's done. You could have fought back sooner, against him. People would have supported you. Maybe. Daniel looked at his screen. But fighting people like Richard on their own ground costs you something. It costs you the part of yourself that knows the difference between what he does and what you do, and I didn't want to pay that. He shook his head slightly. My dad used to say the man who digs 2 graves. He stopped. You know the saying. Revenge digs 2 graves. Yeah, Richard dug his own. I just had to not fall into mine. Marcus sat with that for a moment. You're a better person than me, he said. I would have gone to HR in year 1. And you would have been right to, Daniel said. Different people, different calculus. He picked up his pen. Can we talk about the Northwest Corridor bottleneck? Because I think it has the same root issue as the Midwest one, and I want to get ahead of it before it costs us another year of delay penalties. Marcus blinked. You found another one. I found 2. You want to look at the data. The report went to the board on a Thursday. Daniel wasn't in the room for it. He was at his desk doing the thing he always did, which was the work. He'd been officially told that the restructuring recommendations would be communicated to department heads by end of day, and that Hendricks would brief his team leads by Friday morning. He was not thinking about it. He was thinking about the Northwest Corridor. At 4:15, Hendricks appeared at the edge of his desk. Come up. Daniel looked at him. At the expression on Hendricks's face, which was not alarming, but was weighted, like a man carrying something he wasn't sure how to set down. Now. He followed Hendricks to the elevator to the 3rd floor to the corner office. Hendricks closed the door behind them. Sat behind his desk, this time different from the last conversation when he'd sat across from Daniel at the table. This was formal. This was official. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. Daniel looked at it. It was a title, a role description, a salary figure that he read twice to make sure he was reading it correctly. Director of Operations Midwest and Central Corridor Division. That's, he stopped. 3 levels up from where you are now. Full team leadership, budget authority, reporting directly to the division VP. Hendricks watched him. It's a real position, not a lateral move dressed up in a title. Emily's report recommended the role be created and filled internally. She named you specifically. Daniel looked at the paper. She named me, by name, with 18 months of supporting data. Hendricks paused. The board approved it this morning as part of the restructuring package. Gerald Whitmore signed off personally. Daniel set the paper back on the desk. He sat very still for a moment. He thought about 6 years of coming in at 7:45 and leaving after everyone else. About 2 passed-over promotions and the careful, practiced silence with which he had absorbed them. About a kitchen table in February where someone said, "I can't do this anymore," and didn't finish the sentence. About pancakes burned and remade. About a little girl who walked, didn't run, because she'd decided he was always going to show up, and she had decided to believe that, and he had made it true every single day, because the alternative was unthinkable. He thought about a phone on the floor of an airport gate at O'Hare. "Yes," he said. Hendricks blinked. "You don't want to think about it. I've been doing the work for 6 years. I don't need to think about whether I want the title that goes with it." He looked at Hendricks. "Yes." Hendricks extended his hand. Daniel shook it. "Effective the 1st of next month," Hendricks said. "HR will have the paperwork to you by Monday." Daniel nodded. He picked up the sheet of paper, looked at it one more time. Then he folded it in half and put it in his jacket pocket and went back to his desk and sat down and opened the Northwest Corridor analysis. He had work to do. He called Pete from the parking garage. "Director of Operations," Pete said, and then at a volume that suggested he was alone in his car, "Danny." "Okay. Danny Carter." "I hear you, Pete." "Director of Operations, Midwest and Central Corridor Division." "You can read." "I'm going to need you to let me have this moment." "You have 30 seconds." "That is not enough seconds for this moment." A pause in which Pete was visibly composing himself. "Your dad would have—" He stopped. Daniel held the phone. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know. He would have been so—" "Pete." "Yeah. I know." A beat. "Get home safe," Pete said. His voice was different now, grounded. "Tell Mia." "I will." "And Daniel." "What?" "Don't be an idiot." He hung up on Pete's laugh and sat in his car in the parking garage for a moment alone with the folded paper in his jacket pocket and the particular quality of silence that follows something large. I thought about his father, the mechanic, the man who fixed conveyor systems and packaging lines and believed that a machine doesn't care who fixes it, it just cares whether it runs. The man who had told him 100 times in 100 forms that character was what you did when nobody was watching. Somebody was watching, Daniel thought. Somebody always is. He started the car. He went to pick up his daughter. Mia was at the kitchen table doing homework when he came in, which was new. She'd started walking home from school with the Ortega kids next door 3 days a week, an arrangement that had required Daniel to update approximately 11 safety protocols, and which Mia had accepted with the patient tolerance of someone who understood that her father's anxiety was an expression of love and not technically an argument. She looked up when he came through the door. She looked at his face. "Something happened," she said. "Something happened." She put down her pencil. This was significant. She never put down her pencil mid-problem. Good something or bad something. He set his bag down, sat at the table across from her. "I got a promotion today," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Her expression went through something he couldn't fully track, something quick and layered the way her face moved when she was processing something that mattered more than she wanted to immediately show. "A big one," she asked. Yeah, a big one. She was quiet for another moment. I told you, she said, quietly. Not I told you so, just I told you. A statement of something she had apparently believed for a while. When did you tell me? In the car, after Mrs. K's. I said you were going to be okay. That was a general statement. It was a prediction. She picked her pencil back up. I'm usually right. He looked at his daughter. At the Dragon Encyclopedia on the corner of the table, where she kept it now within reach at all times. At the homework in front of her math which she tolerated, and the book report on the facing page, which she was clearly enjoying more. Mia. She looked up. I need you to know something. He leaned forward, put his arms on the table. Everything good that's happened. The promotion, all of it. It didn't happen because I'm smart or because I work hard. Those things helped. But the reason any of it happened is because a long time ago, before you were old enough to know it, I decided that being your father meant being someone worth being. And I kept trying to be that person. He paused. You made me want to be that person. She looked at him with those dark eyes. Dad, she said. Yeah. You already were that person. She said it with the simple authority of someone who had been paying attention for 7 years and had reached a conclusion. You were just waiting for other people to notice. He sat across from her and felt something in his chest that didn't have a clean name. Something that was gratitude and grief and pride and love, all pressed together into a single weight that was somehow also the lightest he'd felt in years. Finish your homework, he said. I know. She bent back to her math. Can we have spaghetti? Yeah. The good kind, not the jar sauce. I never use jar sauce. You used it once, March, I remember. That was an emergency. Dad. She didn't look up. There's no such thing as a spaghetti emergency. He got up and went to the kitchen. And he stood there for a moment, one hand on the counter, listening to the scratch of his daughter's pencil on the homework paper and the rain sound machine from her room down the hall that she'd accidentally left on, and the ambient noise of the building settling around them. He thought about Christine, about the table in February, about I can't do this anymore, and the silence where the rest of the sentence should have been. He thought, she was wrong about one thing. She said Mia would be better off with one parent who was present than two who were struggling. He thought Mia is better off with one parent who showed up. Every single day. No exceptions. He thought that was always going to be enough. I just had to keep believing it long enough for it to be true. He got the pasta out. He started the water. He made dinner. The first Monday, as Director of Operations, Daniel arrived at 7:45. Same time as always. Same coffee from the same place 2 blocks from the office, medium black, no nonsense. Same route through the lobby, same elevator, same floor. The difference was that when he stepped off the elevator, he turned left instead of right toward the corner office that had been Hendrix's for 11 years and was now his, because Hendrix had been moved up to VP of the full division as part of the restructuring, which meant the corner office with the view of the street was now Daniel Carter's, and his old desk, with the framed photo of Mia in the too big graduation cap, was now occupied by a logistics coordinator named Brianna, who had started last Wednesday and seemed genuinely excellent. He stood in the doorway of the corner office for exactly 3 seconds. Then he walked in, set his coffee on the desk, hung up his jacket, and opened his laptop. He had work to do. The new role came with things he had expected and things he hadn't. He'd expected the expanded scope managing 3 corridor teams instead of 1. The budget authority, the direct line to the divisional VP. He'd expected the learning curve on the administrative side, the additional meetings, the way his calendar filled differently now. He hadn't expected the way people looked at him differently in the hallway. Not with deference, he didn't want deference, and had made that clear in his first team meeting, a 30-minute session he'd kept to 20, because everything had been said, and prolonging it would have been theater. He'd told his 3 team leads, I need your honest read on problems, not the version that sounds best. I need bad news early, not late. I need you to tell me when I'm wrong. That's it. That's the whole philosophy. What he hadn't expected was the way people who had looked past him for 6 years now looked directly at him. It wasn't unkind, Most of them weren't unkind people. They'd just been operating on the assumption that the hierarchy told them what to pay attention to, and now the hierarchy had been revised. He didn't hold it against them. He understood how it worked. He just made a private note to himself about it, filed it in the place where he kept things worth remembering, and moved on. Marcus knocked on the open office door at 9:15. "How does it feel?" "It's a desk. It's a much better desk. It has a view. It has a great view. I can see the parking garage from here." Marcus stepped in and leaned against the doorframe. "You know what your problem is. You and Pete should start a podcast. I'm just saying, you could enjoy this a little." Daniel looked at him. "I do enjoy it. I enjoy it the way I enjoy any tool that works correctly. I have more authority to fix more problems now. That's good. That's useful." He paused. "The view is also genuinely nice." "There it is." Marcus pointed at him. "There's the feeling. Don't make it weird." "Too late. It's already a little weird." He straightened up. "Northwest Corridor data's in your inbox. The second bottleneck you flagged, the numbers are worse than you thought." "I know. I saw them last night." "Of course you did." Marcus shook his head. "Welcome to the job you should have had 2 years ago." He left, and Daniel turned back to his screen, and the Northwest Corridor data was exactly as bad as he'd thought, and he was already building the model. Emily called on a Wednesday evening 3 weeks into the new role. He was at his desk late again, always probably forever working through a staffing analysis for the Central Corridor team, which was understaffed in a way that had been papered over with overtime for 2 years and needed to be addressed properly rather than cosmetically. His cell buzzed. He picked up without looking. "You're still at the office," she said. "How do you know?" "Because it's 7:30, and you answered on the second ring, which means you're at your desk and not doing the thing where you pretend to be available while actually doing bedtime with Mia." He looked at the time on his computer. 7:32. "She's at Mrs. Kowalski's tonight. There was a pierogi situation." "A pierogi situation." "Mia requested a cooking lesson. Mrs. Kowalski agreed. I've been told not to pick her up before 8 because the dough takes time. Your daughter is learning to make pierogis. She's writing notes. She has a notebook specifically for recipes she's collecting from people she considers, and this is her word, credible. 7 years old. 7.5. She's very specific about the half." There was a warmth in the silence that followed. Not empty silence, not the careful silence of two people managing distance, but the kind that exists between people who have stopped needing to fill every gap. "How's New York?" he asked. "Cold. Efficient. The same." "How's the board taking the restructuring?" "Better than expected. The Midwest Corridor numbers from your first month helped. 31% in 2 days was a compelling opening argument. That was the routing model. The team implemented it." "Daniel." "What?" "I swear to you, if you deflect credit one more time, I'm going to come back to Chicago just to have this argument with you in person." He was quiet for a beat. "That's an interesting threat," he said carefully. Another beat, slightly longer. "Yes," she said, equally carefully. "I suppose it is." The silence that followed was different from the previous one, more loaded. The kind of silence that knows it's carrying something and isn't sure yet whether to set it down or keep moving. "Emily." "Yeah." "When is your next trip to Chicago?" A pause. "The quarterly board review is in 6 weeks. I'll be on site for 3 days. And after the quarterly review?" "After it, I don't have a specific timeline." She paused again. "Why?" "Because I'd like to have dinner. Not a working dinner. Not a debrief. Just dinner. With you." He said it the way he did most things, directly, without decoration, with the calm of someone who had thought about it long enough to be certain. "If that's something you want." The silence on her end lasted long enough that he found himself studying the parking garage view from his new office window with excessive focus. "Daniel." Her voice was different now, not guarded, something that had been carefully maintained for a long time and had just not collapsed exactly, just settled, become itself. "I sent a 7-year-old girl a Dragon encyclopedia." "I know. I looked up the specific edition she wanted. The illustrated one with the taxonomy appendix. I spent 45 minutes on a bookstore website making sure I had the right one. I know. I don't do that. I don't spend 45 minutes on bookstore websites for people I'm professionally associated with. I know, Emily. So yes. A breath. Dinner. When I'm in Chicago. Yes. He looked at the parking garage. Good, he said. Good, she said. Get some sleep. You get some sleep. You're the one still at the office at 7:30. The staffing analysis. We'll be there tomorrow. Go get your daughter and her pierogi notes and go home. He looked at the staffing analysis on his screen. Yeah, he said. Okay. He hung up and closed the laptop and put on his jacket. He stood at the window for just a moment, the parking garage, the street beyond it, the city going about its evening business, with its usual indifference to the small important things happening inside the buildings it surrounded. He picked up his coffee cup, which was long cold. He went to get Mia. She was at Mrs. Kowalski's kitchen table when he arrived, the notebook open, her handwriting filling 3 pages, with what appeared to be detailed instructions for pierogi dough, including a note in the margin that said, "The water temperature is critical. Do not guess," underlined twice. Mrs. Kowalski was washing dishes with the satisfied expression of someone who has passed something important to the next generation. She's a natural, Mrs. Kowalski said without turning around. She's terrifying, Daniel said. Same thing. Mia looked up. She had flour on her left cheek and the calm pride of a person who had learned something real. I made them, she said. The pierogis. We made them together, but I did the folding myself. How were they? Structurally sound. The filling ratio needs adjustment. She looked at her notes. I wrote down the problem and the proposed solution. Mrs. K agrees with my diagnosis. She's not wrong, Mrs. Kowalski said from the sink. Daniel looked at his daughter, the flour on her cheek, the notebook full of careful observations, the absolute seriousness with which she approached the things she decided mattered. Pack up your notes, he said. Time to go. She packed her notebook. She hugged Mrs. Kowalski with the efficiency of someone who was affectionate, but running a schedule. At the door, Mrs. Kowalski caught Daniel's arm. She asked about the woman. Mrs. Kowalski said quietly. Mia was already in the hallway pulling on her coat. The one from Chicago. What did she ask? She asked if she was going to come back. Daniel looked at her. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't know, but that she seemed like the kind of person who finishes what she starts. Mrs. Kowalski looked at him with the 70-year-old directness of someone who has run out of time for anything less than honesty. Is that true? I think so, he said. Yeah, I think that's true. Mrs. Kowalski patted his arm once. The Polish grandmother's equivalent of a full blessing. Good, she said. Now go home. 6 weeks moved, the way time moves when you are busy enough and present enough, not slowly, not quickly, but with the particular fullness of days that are actually lived rather than endured. Daniel built the staffing model for the central corridor and presented it to the divisional VP, who approved the additional headcount. He ran the Northwest corridor analysis and found, as he'd suspected, the same route inefficiency as the Midwest, a miscalibration in the transfer sequencing that had been grandfathered into the System 3 software updates ago and never corrected. He fixed it. He fixed the other one. He documented both and shared the methodology with the full operations team, because what was the point of solving a problem if the solution couldn't survive the solver? Mia turned 7.5 and announced she had completed a preliminary classification system for dragons based on metabolic theory and was planning to present it to her class. Her teacher sent home a note that said, Mia is a remarkable student. We are all learning to keep up. Daniel put it on the refrigerator. He called his sister in Portland twice and his mother once, which was more than his average, and reflected, he thought, a general willingness to let people in that had been quietly increasing since the fall. His mother asked if he was seeing anyone. He said not yet. She heard something in the yet and asked no follow-up questions, which was its own form of grace. He slept better than he had in 2 years. I wasn't entirely sure when that had started or what exactly had shifted. but he noticed it the way you notice the absence of a sound that had been constant for so long, you'd stopped registering it as noise. Emily arrived on a Tuesday. He knew she was in the building before he saw her, the atmospheric shift again, the one he'd noticed the first time. The way a room reorganizes itself around certain people without anyone deciding to do it. He heard it from 2 floors down, that slight change in the building's social weather. He did not go upstairs. He had work. He did the work. She came down at noon. She stood in his office doorway, the corner office, the one with the parking garage view, which she saw immediately, and said, "Nice view." "The parking garage is very clean this time of year." She smiled, set her bag down in the chair across from his desk, sat in the other one. "You painted it," she said, looking at the walls. "It was beige." "It's still beige." "It's a different beige." She looked at it. "You're right, it's warmer. It takes 6 weeks to requisition paint in this building. I submitted the request the day I moved in." "Of course you did." She looked at him across the desk. "You look different." "It's the same face." "The face is the same. Something else is different." She studied him with the directness she brought to everything. The same look she'd given Pete's kitchen table, the quarterly data, the conference room full of people who expected her to be manageable. "You look like someone who believes what's happening to them." He thought about this. "I think that's probably accurate." "Good." She folded her hands in her lap. "The dinner. Tonight. If that works." "It works." A pause. "Is Mia Mrs. Kowalski? Does she know?" "Mrs. Kowalski knows everything. It's better not to question it." Emily looked at him for a moment. "I'd like to meet her. Properly. Not just as a name attached to pierogies." "She'd like that too. She already has opinions about you." "What kind of opinions?" "Favorable. She told me you seemed like someone who finishes what they start." Something moved through Emily's expression. She said that, to Mia, and then to me. Emily was quiet for a moment. "How does Mia feel about all of this?" It was a careful question asked carefully, and he respected the care in it. "She asked Mrs. Kowalski if you were coming back," he said. 6 weeks ago, the night she made pierogies." He paused. "She hasn't asked me directly, but she left the Dragon Encyclopedia on the kitchen table last week, open to the dedication page, which has a quote about how the creatures we think are myths are sometimes just the ones we haven't been paying close enough attention to find." Emily stared at him. "Your 7-year-old daughter left a book open to a metaphor. She's 7.5. She's very specific about the half." "Daniel." Emily's voice had something in it he hadn't heard before, something that was almost undone. "She left you a message." "I know. In a dragon book." "I know. That's—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. Then, "She sounds extraordinary. She's the best person I know." He said it without qualification, without the apologetic softening that people sometimes apply to statements about their children in adult company. "She has been from the beginning. Even when everything else was hard, she was always extraordinary." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "I want to meet her," she said. "When the time is right. When it makes sense. I don't want to. I know it's complicated, and I know she's been through—" "Emily." "What?" "She already knows your name." Emily went still. "She asked me," he said simply. 3 weeks ago. She said, 'Is the woman from the airport named Emily?' And I said yes. And she said, 'That's a good name.' And she went back to reading." The silence in the office had a quality to it now, warm and slightly fragile, the way the air feels after rain has stopped and before anything has dried. "Okay," Emily said, softly. "Okay," he said. She stood up, picked up her bag. At the door, she paused, one hand on the frame. 7 o'clock. 7 is good. I'll find somewhere without rubber chicken. Bold requirement. I have high standards." She glanced at the wall. "The beige is definitely better." She left, and he sat at his desk in the corner office with the parking garage view and the better beige walls. and he thought about dragon encyclopedias left open to dedication pages and pierogi notebooks, and a 7.5-year-old girl who had decided to leave her father a message in the language she trusted most. He turned back to his screen. He had 2 hours of work before 7 o'clock. He made them count. The restaurant she'd chosen was on the north side, small Italian. The kind of place where the tables were close together, and the lighting was honest, and the menu was short, because everything on it was actually good. She was there when he arrived already seated, which surprised him until he realized she was always early. People who had spent their lives managing things were always early. It was a reflex. An insurance policy against the world being slower than expected. He sat across from her. They ordered wine. They ordered food. They talked the way they'd been moving toward talking since Pete's kitchen table 6 weeks ago, without the professional layer, without the careful calibration of two people who were also in a review process, without the thickness of everything that had been between them and in the way. She told him about growing up as Gerald Whitmore's daughter. Not bitterly, she loved her father, that was clear and uncomplicated, but honestly with the specificity of someone who had spent years understanding the shape of her own life rather than just living inside it. The way people looked at her name before they looked at her face. The way rooms rearranged around her father, and she had learned to either leverage that or resist it, and had spent most of her 20s figuring out which impulse to trust in which situation. The way she'd built a career that was genuinely hers. The analysis, the rigor, the willingness to put findings in reports that powerful people didn't want to read specifically, so that nobody, including herself, could ever say what she'd achieved was the name. "Is that why you didn't tell me?" he asked. "At the airport. Why you let me call you just Emily?" "Partly." She turned her wine glass once. "Partly it was exhaustion. I'd had a hard week before the conference. Some things at work, some personal things. And I was sitting in that airport, trying to hold it together and not doing a great job, and you just appeared and were so completely uncomplicated about it. You didn't want anything. You weren't performing anything. You just picked up my phone and called your friend Pete." She paused. "I didn't want to watch that change." "What personal things?" he asked, carefully. The way you ask when you want the real answer and you're prepared to receive it. She looked at him. Made the decision visible the small moment of choosing honesty over management. "I'd ended a relationship, a few weeks before the conference. Someone I'd been with for 2 years. He was good on paper, the right background, the right ambitions, the right everything. And he cared about me, I believe that." She looked at the wine. "But he cared about me the way you care about something that belongs to you. And I couldn't..." She stopped. "I kept waiting to feel like myself around him. And I never did." Daniel listened without filling the space. "In Pete's kitchen," she continued, "you asked me if I liked my job. Not what I did, not who my father was, not what the company was worth. You asked if I liked it, like the answer mattered to you independent of everything else." "It did." "I know." She looked at him. "I know it did. That's the thing." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not uncomplicated," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I have a daughter who is extraordinary and also 7.5 and has very strong feelings about moisture ratios in baked goods. I have 2 years of rebuilding from something that broke me more than I let anyone see. I have a job I care about and habits I probably can't change, and I burn pancakes and start over, and I will always put Mia first, in every situation, without apology." "I know," she said, simply, without flinching. "Those aren't small things." "Daniel." She met his eyes. "I spent 45 minutes finding the right dragon encyclopedia. I know what I'm doing." He looked at her across the table. This woman who had sat in an airport trying not to fall apart, who had stood in a conference room and told the truth in front of 40 people because it was the right thing to do, who had pulled 13 years of records because the work required it, who had called on a Wednesday evening for no professional reason and told him to go home and get his daughter. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. They ate dinner. They talked for 3 hours, which surprised him because he was not usually a man who talked for 3 hours. And when the restaurant began, the gentle, polite process of existing. Past its closing time. They walked out into the February night. February again, 1 year from the month. Everything had broken, which seemed like either coincidence or the universe being heavy-handed about symmetry, and stood on the sidewalk in the cold. "I'll call a car," she said. "I'm parked 2 blocks down." "I know, She paused. "I wanted a minute." He stood with her in the cold, and they were quiet together. The way they'd been quiet in the back of the car to Pete's house, 12 degrees outside, and a storm that had just happened, the city going white around them. "Next time," he said, "I want you to meet Mia." She looked at him. "Are you sure?" She left a book open to a metaphor. "I think she's already decided." He paused. "And I'm sure." Emily looked at the street, at the February air turning her breath visible, at the city that had been here before both of them and would be here after. She looked back at him with the expression she wore when she wasn't managing anything, when she was just herself, uncurated, present. "Okay," she said. "Okay." The car came. She got in. He watched it go. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the cold, and he thought, 1 year ago I was sitting at a kitchen table while someone said, "I can't do this anymore." And he thought, I thought that was the end of something. But it was the end of something that needed to end. He walked 2 blocks to his car. He drove home through February streets that were clear tonight. No storm, just cold and clean, and the particular brightness of city air in winter. Mia was asleep when he got home. Mrs. Kowalski was on the couch reading. She had a key, had had one for 2 years. Used it with the dignified restraint of someone who understood the difference between having access and exercising it. She looked up when he came in, looked at his face. She nodded once. The compressed wisdom of 7 decades applied to a single look. "Good," she said. She closed her book and stood up and got her coat from the chair. "Mrs. Kowalski." She stopped. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. For the 2 years." She looked at him with the directness she'd had since the first week after Christine left, when she'd knocked on his door with a pot of soup and said not one word about what had happened, and not one word of pity, just set the pot on his counter and told him to eat. "You never needed thanks," she said. "You needed someone to show up, so I showed up." She buttoned her coat. "That's all any of us can do." She left. He stood in his apartment in the quiet. He went to check on Mia. She was asleep on her back, the Dragon encyclopedia on the nightstand, where he always moved it, the notebook with the pierogi instructions on the desk. Her rain sound machine made its soft static. The room was warm. He stood in the doorway and looked at his daughter. I thought about everything it had taken to get to this exact moment. Every burned pancake, every late night, every quiet humiliation, absorbed without complaint. Every morning he had gotten up. When getting up was the hardest thing he could imagine, and done it anyway, because she was on the other side of it, and she needed him to. He thought about a phone on a floor at O'Hare. About 12 degrees and a storm and a stranger who needed somewhere to be. About Pete's couch and Pete's eggs, and the specific, unglamorous kindness of calling a friend and asking for a favor. He thought about character being what you do when nobody's watching. And then he thought somebody was always watching. I just didn't know it. He pulled Mia's door, almost closed, the way she liked it. Not all the way, never all the way, because she liked the thin line of hall light, had liked it since she was 3, and he had learned every version of what she needed and delivered it without being asked. He went to the kitchen. He got a glass of water. He stood at the counter in the quiet of his apartment. This apartment he'd rebuilt from the floor up in this city, in this life that had broken and been remade into something he hadn't planned, but had somehow, without entirely meaning to, built into something true. He thought Christine left, and I thought I had lost my future. He thought I hadn't lost it. I just hadn't found it yet. And somewhere across the city, in a hotel room with a view. She hadn't asked about Emily Whitmore, was looking at her phone at the photo she'd taken 3 weeks ago. Not of Daniel, not of anything dramatic. Just the Dragon encyclopedia, open to the dedication page that Mia had left on the kitchen table. She'd asked Daniel to send it to her. He had, without asking why. She looked at it now. The quote about the creatures we think are myths, being the ones we haven't paid close enough attention to find. And she thought about a man who had picked up her phone from the floor of an airport terminal and expected nothing and received nothing and had done it anyway because the math was simple, because she needed help, because that was who he was. And she thought the people who change your life are never the ones you were looking for. They're the ones who were already there doing the right thing in the dark when they thought no one was watching. And they are exactly, completely, entirely enough. The rain sound machine ran quietly down the hall. Mia slept. Daniel stood in his kitchen in the apartment he had built, and the life he had earned, and the quiet that was no longer the wrong size. And for the first time in 2 years, for the first time in longer than that, maybe longer than he'd admitted even to himself, he was not bracing for what came next.